This is Comic Shenanigans, episode 1081, a conversation with Judd Winick.
Ain't no stopping them shenanigans. Love getting into shenanigans. All up in them shenanigans. 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 Shenanigans.
Welcome to the Comic Shenanigans podcast. I'm your host, Adam Chapman. This is episode 1081. It's another conversation with Judd Winick. Actually, not just another conversation with Judd Winick. It's the 10th episode with Judd Winick. Judd has been a good friend of the show for many years now. Annually, I have him back on the show to talk about the newest HILO volume in his long-running series now, which has just had book 11. So this was a really fun conversation. It's a little spoilery at times. We talk about the 11th volume as well as the 10th. We talk about kind of what it's been like working on the series as a whole. Picking up, it's interesting if you go back and listen to the previous episodes. We continue a lot of the themes from prior episodes, and then kind of getting into some of the nitty gritty of his work here and how his work has evolved over time, because he's been working on this obviously for quite a while. Now that he's up to book 11. So this was a lot of fun to be able to sit down with Judd. I look forward to hopefully having him on another episode this summer, as we kind of talk about here, about potentially having him back on to talk about his Green Arrow run, which I'm excited to kind of reread soon as part of a big Green Arrow reread that I'm going to do of that particular volume that I originally started with Kevin Smith, then went to Brad Meltzer, and then went over to Judd Winick. So I'm very excited to have him back as well. Near the end, we actually end up talking a little bit more about a relatively recent episode that I did, I guess it was actually probably more than a year ago now, where I talked about Pedro and me for a Book of the Month Club. So I'll be honest, I'm including it, it's a little self-indulgent because he says some kind things about the podcast in an episode that he actually listened to. But if you want to listen to the Book of the Month Club episode on Pedro and me, that is episode, it was a lot longer than I thought. It was episode 1025. It was a Book of the Month Club that I did kind of at the spur of the moment with my wife, Kelly Chapman. And that was where we talked about Pedro and me, which has been it's a phenomenal graphic novel that Judd did back in the 90s, but it still resonates, it still hits, and we had a really interesting conversation I really enjoyed, and apparently Judd did too, so that was kind of nice for me. It was a nice ego boost for me that I also did not embarrass myself. I'm always worried, like, what if someone listens to something I said about their work? Thankfully, it was nice things. This was a lot of fun to once again sit down with Judd. Again, he's so giving with his time. He's such a great creator. He's got a really interesting voice. He's always an interesting personality to talk to. He's got some interesting things to say. And again, it's interesting if you look at his body of work and the different things he's been able to do in different styles. He obviously, he brings so much to the projects that he works on, but it's interesting to see how he can tap into different pieces, and what has eventually kind of led him to HILO, which really was a family affair in a lot of ways. So anyways, thank you for listening to my long preamble. Let's jump right into the conversation with Judd, which again is the 10th episode he's been on of the Comic Shenanigans oeuvre, the episode list. He's been in 10 now, so that's rarefied air. I'm trying to think how many people have been on 10. Obviously, Ron Friends would be the easy one. But besides that, I'm not sure if anyone's gotten up to 10. So he's definitely a great repeat guest. You can email me at comicshenanigans@gmail.com. Rate the show on Apple Podcasts. Listen to us on Apple Podcasts, and also listen to us on Spotify. Thanks again for listening and putting up with this. Let's jump right into the conversation with Judd Winick. Enjoy. Judd, welcome back to the Comic Shenanigans podcast. How are you today?
I'm excellent, sir, and it's so good to be back with you all. Really, 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 I'm thrilled for an opportunity to chat again. We always have such nice conversations. It's really good to be back.
Well, it's very kind of you to say. It's always fun because I know in February we're going to get a new HILO and I'm going to get a new chance to talk with you. So it's always something I look forward to. This is somehow the 10th time that we've spoken on the podcast. So I just want to thank you again for being a returning guest and being always so gracious with your time.
Sure, I think I've spoken on your podcast more than any other. So there.
There we go. So before we talk about the big new book, which is The Great Space Iguana, which is book 11 of HILO. I do have to go back. In preparation for reading the new one, I did go back and read The Rise of the Cat. And I just want to commend you again on such a fantastic book, because, and I don't know why, maybe it was just my headspace this time. It hit me harder this time in terms of your messages of tolerance, of going through something and being another, and still finding one's dignity and really being strong, even if it does hurt you inside, but not letting it necessarily hurt you. And I thought where we are in the world these days, it felt even more prevalent. So thank you for how exquisitely well written it was.
Oh, well, thank you, sir. I mean, yeah. I know I'm having difficulty leaning into the compliment, as I often do, coupled with acknowledging that was the intention. I wanted to have a discussion on characters being othered. This is a robot that we're talking about, a robot named Naraya in the book, and so we're not exactly talking about race exactly, which is good, which is what good science fiction can do, but managing to talk about discrimination and being othered, and I thank you. I'm very, very proud. I hope a number of young people can see it and acknowledge it as well and understand it as well. I'm sure they do. Kids understand right and wrong. So I'm glad you dug it.
That's true. Absolutely. So obviously we had talked last year about how, the next book was going to be kind of not a diversion per se, but it's going to tell the other side of an equation leading up to something else. So in the Great Space Iguana, we kind of go back to the more familiar characters that we're used to, which is HILO, DJ, and Gina. And what I thought was so interesting as kind of a thorough line, which you can kind of connect since the beginning, is the idea that, DJ was kind of our everyman, so to speak. He wasn't the one with magic. He wasn't the one who was a robot or had special powers. He was our everyman, but at the same time, he is the center. And so you really kind of zero in here on, first of all, his feelings of wanting to have the band back together, what that means to him. And that's something we've explored before, but it felt like you really put your finger on it more in this particular volume. And then having other characters start to realize and be told, like, no, he is the center of this, and this is why he is important. So I'm curious how you wanted to put that journey that DJ's on in the middle.
Oh, what an excellent question. For a while now, since we pivoted our hero to a different hero. So I had originally only planned on doing 6 books, and the first book came out and was humble brag, arguably pretty successful. And my editor had said, it's like, well, if you wanted to go beyond 6 books, you can. It's like, yeah, but we talked about this. Like, originally I told you, I'll do 20 books. And you said, like, we do 20 books, and a 10-year-old is just reading about the HILO mystery for the first time will be 30 by the time you're done with it. Like, oh, okay, maybe I'll get to the ending of the HILO story a little bit quicker. Which I did. I figured I'll do it in 6, and, the mystery of who HILO is and how he got here, and, basically everything will be, unraveled in 6 books. But then she said you could do more. I said, well, I don't have another story. And my editor, Shane, actually decides to quote her on this. Like, well, at the end of the 6th book, they all don't die, do they? It's like, no. It's like, okay, we'll think of something. And sure enough, I did, beginning with that. I was going to have Gina, and discovered at one point, this was not originally part of my original plans, that she could start to do magic. And I thought it was pretty cool. And that's when I started thinking, not long after that, like, well, you know what? It would be kind of fun if we change gears a little bit, and after I finish up the HILO story, that we kind of dive into a Gina story for a while. That'll be fun. And it didn't take any time at all for kids, young readers, to start asking me, when I would do these school visits, like, so is DJ going to get powers and have the adventure next? And I was surprised the number of kids who were really clued in on it. Not just that they're trying to see around corners or anything or guess where the story's going, but they seemed kind of invested in DJ. And, to be really blunt about it, I'd seen a lot of interest in DJ, like kids asking a ton of questions about DJ. A lot of Asian kids who, were finally seen and liked having a character who was, kind of our de facto protagonist along with HILO. And, I think they like a chunk of the authenticity in the character, because I base so much of DJ's family on my wife's family. Pam does playing along. My wife Pam Ling is Asian American, so entirely almost everything about DJ's family comes from her family and in funny ways, and luckily my family thinks it's funny too. But a lot of them are kind of invested. They like the idea that, like, okay, DJ's going to get powers. And I kept having to tell them, like the honest answer was like, no, DJ's not going to get powers. You know, he's us. He's our kind of everyman gang. He represents, the one who's not so long for the ride, but the one who's like, the regular human being. And Gina wasn't. Gina was like someone who was going to be extra special in that way. But I did think / know that, like, it's like, well, but there's a quality to DJ which makes him special. And I started sharing that with kids here and there. That, like, it's like we will get into that all this. I mean, I pointed out to them, I always pointed out to them that, the story's all about DJ. Nothing happens in HILO without DJ. DJ, HILO comes to DJ. I mean, if you go point by point, every major move happens because of something that DJ does. DJ figures out, what Izzy's up to. DJ actually connects with Izzy more so than anybody. And he's connected with HILO more than anybody. Gina is his best friend from his childhood. And all things sort of lead back to DJ, and I wonder why that is. We are going to, so in this book, we just, very long answered the simple question that we're starting to dip our toe into the fact that there's a reason for this. He is not special because he has superpowers. He's special because of who he is and who he's always been. So we're going to start investigating that. I don't want to tell too much about it. But if anyone's listening here who is a kiddo or a grown-up who's reading, I will tell you, it's not going to be something like DJ's got some magical kind of thing going on. It's not going to be quite like that. But there's a reason. It's a reason. He's always been special.
What I did appreciate, it's interesting hearing you talking about that and our kind of, what DJ's story means and how he's evolved. It's interesting in this volume because you do give him some new attributes, but, like, again, it's based in what the character would do and what a human could do. Like, he's,
right.
He's been working out, so now his body's different. So, but that's not superpowers. It's just he's worked on himself and has a new physical attribute. You bring in the idea that he has perfect aim, and obviously that's something that carries through in some key moments throughout the story, which is kind of a nice new thing, but again, not something that's not human. And that isn't something that someone could do and could practice at. So I like that you added new elements for DJ, but again, it was still grounded in reality, whereas everyone around him can do much more fantastical things.
Oh, well, thank you. I would say that's the best, closest I get to fan service. For again, like young people saying, can DJ get powers? Like, well, I don't like him powers. That's a little bit too much, but let me make him good at some stuff. Let him kick a little ass here and there. And, it also makes for real fun. I mean, I had delights in that my editor, she was like sort of, I'm not talking out of school. I think I'm okay talking about this. She will often give me notes which pay off later. Meaning, like, she'll ask a question, like, while reading it and not go back and erase the note. And I think she likes to leave those in just so I can see sort of the flow and how it's happening for her as a reader. So, hitting a note here, like, I don't know if this whole bit here, and for those playing at home, who might not have read the book yet, we hang a lantern on the fact that DJ is in really good shape now. As much as an 11-year-old can be. And for those playing at home, hanging a lantern means, pointing it out. An old expression is Chekhov's gun, and that is, if you're going to show a gun in the first act, it has to pay off later. So I got DJ, and his sister Lisa and his mom have taken to, doing, this massive calisthenic workout, and it's kind of goofy. And my editor had said, yeah, this is kind of funny, but I don't know if we need this. And she's always looking for places to cut so we can, maybe, you cut a page here, you can add a page later. And then later she said, oh, now I see it. Okay, never mind. It's like, oh, he's in shape so he can run around like crazy. I get it now. Okay, he's in really good shape. Got it. Okay. She liked the perfect game thing, just thought it was cute and didn't question it. And later said, yeah, I didn't know why you put that in there. And then later it's like, oh, you're doing the thing. DJ's in great shape. He's in perfect aim. Boy's got some skills. Yes, that's what I gave him. I gave him skills that any kid who works really hard can, maybe get. So those things again, we're building to a few things. I gave him some stuff he can do, just because it's a little bit of fun, and also that I agree with the kiddos who wanted, DJ to be able to do stuff. Everybody. I mean, HILO can fly and shoot lasers out of his hands. Gina not only do magic, she's becoming like a rather powerful sorcerer. And DJ, is still just a kid who goes to school, hangs out with his buddies. And, the unobvious thing is that, DJ's a hero in his own right. Like, he's rather fearless when they're in trouble. And he's got that. But I just thought it'd be a little bit fun, to have him have a little bit of juice. And also, because he's the least powerful among the three of them, that the trouble he gets into, HILO and DJ can get out of like obviously the trouble that DJ gets into, HILO and Gina can just get out of it pretty easily because they have powers. DJ cannot, so we had to give him some skills, which again, added for comedy, added a little bit of juice. It was very thoughtful, I'll say that. This book had more setups and payoffs than I've had in maybe any other book. By design, I wanted to do a bunch, because it's really a magic trick of storytelling. And the only time you really see it is kind of in stand-up comedy. I mean, like literally. And, I'll explain setups and payoffs. It is when you mention something, whether a joke or a setup or whatnot, and then later it pays off in some significant way. Like in this case, so we mentioned that someone has perfect aim and it comes up organically. And later he gets a bow and arrow. It's incredibly important that he can just pick it up and use it really, really well because he's got perfect aim. And with stand-up, I always love it. People actually applaud. They get applause breaks. If you make a joke, if you're doing an hour set and you make a joke in the first 15 or 20 minutes and then come back to it like a half an hour later, people applaud. Like you've just did a perfect dismount. It's like, he brought it back. He brought that back. Here we are. And what's great is people don't think about it. It's like doing a magic trick. So I like a good payoff. I do. When things, all things like kind of fit together, key in a lock sort of thing. It's fun.
Speaking of, so again, this idea of the magic trick. So, you also give DJ a limitation that because of all the working out, now he has these involuntary, arm spasms, which causes his arm to go up, which is again another fun moment that you do have pay off as well. And that it happens very innocently again at the beginning, and it's kind of a corollary to, yes, he can do this, but now there's this, and then you kind of bring that back as well. So again, it's nice to see those types of setups being used as you mentioned, because first of all, when you first introduce it, it makes sense because you're kind of using it as a comedic tool. Something to counterbalance the fact that, he can do this, but now he has a limitation, and then you do bring it back. So that, again, was another nice magic trick that you put in.
Thank you. Yeah. In this conversation, I forgot, all right, I did the arm thing too, which, yeah. Again, I was trying really hard in this book. There are a couple of things. I wanted this one to be, I always try to make them funny, as possible. But as we get on, as we get further along, our plots are getting more intricate. The characters, I've chosen to have them evolve a bit. Not a ton. They never get any older, but things happen. Our story's moving forward, and we are getting further away. And it is a pitfall. We're getting further away from the simple concept of, three kids running around the suburbs going to school, and one of them happens to be a super robot who can fly around and shoot lasers out of his hands. So, now we literally have three kids in outer space, and we're gonna accept that, and, one of them is like the protector of all magic on Earth, and, it's deeply complicated. But with that, I wanted to make sure, I want this to be a really funny one. I want to cram this, with as many jokes as I can and as many opportunities as I can to get that in there. At the same time, having to do the service of, we're going to move the story forward because we are building to an ending of an arc that we're just kind of getting into. This is an arc which will it won't be the end of the HILO series, but I will say it might be the last big arc. Probably. I don't know. I mean, again, this might be 3 books. It might be 5 books. I'm unsure at this point. I know where we land. I know I have some plans here and there, but after this, I might go to that we land on a status quo. And by the way, 4 books from now is what I'm saying. We land on a status quo, and after that, it might be one-offs rather than doing, these story arcs. Because it's been 10 years. It's been 10 years. I have to start work on my 12th book right now. Discounting that I did finish the 12th HILO book, but it's not counted. It's book 3.5. I'll explain. I'll explain that right now since we're talking about it. The next HILO book, which gave me the idea of doing these one-offs, which was a little more freeing. So coming in winter of 2026, actual winter, not publishing winter, for those who know what that means. So like September, October, November, when the holiday book's going to sell. So we're doing a holiday book, is what I'm trying to say. So it's the HILO Day special. Like, it's a tongue twister. I keep trying to do that. And it's a one-off, and it's just about like them going on an adventure around holiday time. And it's not a religious book or anything like that. It acknowledges that people celebrate various things, but it's mostly about snow and decoration and gift giving and a big giant monster they have to deal with. What's fun about it is it's a flashback-ish. The book falls between books 3 and 4. And I did that simply because I got too much business going on and where the series is right now, and they couldn't, in my comic book brain, like, I can't step off the treadmill and just do this holiday book. They've got, like, Gina's got this going on, HILO's got that going on. And it's like, let me just say there's a little lost adventure that you guys didn't get to see that happened between, I'll back it up because I'm sure you heard that text come in. So this is a little adventure that got caught in between. So in between books 3 and 4. So anyone who's read the series, this is before book 6. We have not wrapped up things with razor work. And beyond that, I don't want to give any more spoilers about what happens after book 3 and 4. But anyway, falls right in between. And Izzy is in there. And it actually turned out, purely by accident when I was writing, it's kind of an Izzy story. It's like an Izzy-centric story. So HILO's sister, Isabel, Izzy. She is the kind of one who leads the charge in this book. And it was fun, and it was sweet, and it was kind of simple. Just A to B to C. Which also enticed me that, like, yeah, I've got this big story, but I think when I'm done with the big story, I want to tell a bit simpler ones. So following this holiday special, sometime in the next 3 years, will also be a HILO Halloween special, which I'm excited about because I love Halloween. I've always wanted to do one of these. So there is, like, as much as I'm saying, like, yeah, we're finishing up. I've already mentioned like 6 different books we're going to do before, before HILO doesn't end. When I'm just going to cut back to doing ones that sort of like are just standalones, as well as 2 new series. So there.
So I did have a question about that. So you mentioned it's coming out later this year, because I think in the book it says coming in 2026. But you're saying it is going to come out in 2025?
No,
it is. Okay.
So 1 year from now, or this got to feel like it's boring, this publishing stuff. So a year from now, got a new series coming out. It's called The Mighty. It is about a 12-year-old girl named Miranda Luna who discovers that she can turn into this 9-foot furry monster. So she does what any kid would do, which is doesn't tell her parents and fights crime. So this is a little bit closer to, it feels a little more like Spider-Man, a little bit closer to the Hulk, sort of in that vein. It's a lot of fun. I mean, I'm already done. It's like we're finishing up the colors, and that looks like ready to roll. And it's from the world of HILO. How's that?
Well, definitely intrigued. I'm assuming you'll come back next year to talk about it.
Endlessly, yes. I'm happy to talk about it. I mean, that was the thing I forgot about as we're doing it, like boring publishing marketing stuff. It's like, yeah, we'll do this and that. Like, oh no, it's a whole new book. We gotta do all this. We gotta do that. We gotta send out advanced reader copies, probably physical ones. Oh, right. Gosh, forgot about all that. Yeah, got it. And then after discussions, it was like, it's from the world of HILO. And it's like, we're gonna put that in the cover. Okay, put it on the cover. Sure. Okay. It has the benefit of being true, so it is. It's from the world of HILO. And as you read the book, you'll see. So it's in there.
Now, I want to get back for a second to when you were writing both books, I guess 10 and 11, because when we talked about book 10 before, it sounded like, I'm trying to remember what you said before, but I guess that basically while you were writing, you realized that 11 had to be a separate book and it couldn't kind of be all in one, and allowed you to focus more on Polly and Pip. And so I'm curious about when you're coming into 11, like as you're writing 10, are you in your mind kind of thinking, okay, well, this is what's happening on the other side of this, and then when you get to 11, it's easier because you already kind of have an outline of how that fits in? Or like, how did you handle, because you are kind of developing parallel stories in a way? I'm trying to be not obvious for people who haven't read it, but there's, obviously some shared elements between them, even though they're very much separate stories. So I'm curious how you approached 11 after having written 10.
Well, yeah, it was a little, happy accident is the word. I just stumbled upon it. So I finished book 10, and book 11 was to continue with the story, literally picking up right where we left off. And I will give this spoiler for those who have not read 10, but it's been a year, so catch up. At the very end of book 10, Polly is all about Polly and Pip are magical anthropomorphic cats, and on their world of oceans, it's all about them. No HILO, no Gina, no DJ, but they do show up in the end, the very, very end. And as I was planning book 11 again, which picks up right where we left off, I kind of wanted to give a little bit of a story about what the three of them were up to, and what brought them to come to Ocean, because they, whatever. It's a spoiler, they fall through a portal and they're there. So I'm writing it, and at first I'm keeping it very simple, and then I'm fleshing it out a little bit. And as I'm fleshing out what the story is that kind of got them there, I had kind of a moment of inspiration with like, this can easily be a really big story of what they're up to. And had me thinking of, an episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which, Buffy the Vampire Slayer for me is a bit of a touchstone storytelling wise. Joss Whedon difficulties aside in the modern era. There is an episode called The Zeppo, which I always deeply enjoyed, and I'll explain it as fast as I can. It's a great episode with Xander, who's a member of the Buffy Scooby Gang. Basically makes reference to the fact early in this episode that he is not needed for this adventure that Buffy and everyone else are going. They're going to go fight this massive demon, this whole thing going on. And Xander is left behind. And he makes a reference to the episode that he's Zeppo. He's the least interesting of the Marx brothers. Nobody cares. No one knows about me. I don't do anything. And the whole episode is what Xander is doing while Buffy and the gang are fighting this incredible, devastating creature, whatever it is. We only get the tiniest snippets of what Buffy and the gang are up to, but we follow Xander the entire episode, and he goes on his own adventure, which a lot of things happen. And I always thought it was cool. And it was over with, what have you been up to? It's like, oh, nothing, quiet night at home, whereas like he had an entirely life-changing experience in one evening. So that was circling in my head, like, what if they do a whole thing? What if they do a whole thing? And it was also a little bit freeing because, it's like, well, I need to do this adventure that wraps up, but then, popping into this portal. And then as I was writing it, I realized, what would be a cool magic trick if I could actually tie into what's happening with Polly and Pip to what is happening with Gina and HILO and DJ, if I could manage to do that. And then I did, and I was so very, very proud of myself. And it was one of these things where if kids get a little bit lost, like, look, just read book 10 again, you'll see it all completely links up. I was very careful about it. But at the same time, doesn't matter. Doesn't mean a thing. You can read book 11 and not have to know this perfectly syncs up with book, with book 10. Doesn't matter. But for me, it was a fun bit of storytelling exercise. I got to do it in space, which I noted. I really haven't done a space adventure like straight up before. I haven't been able to steal all my Star Wars stuff. Like Star Trek, Star Wars, you name it, like anything else I want to swipe and steal and move around. So that was a blast. And it was a happy accident, which I did check in with my editor. I literally saying what I want to do is instead of continuing the story, I want to do a side adventure. I'd explain it just as I did to you, but even longer, that we're going to do this and do that. Like, she's, oh no, that sounds like fun. Do that. Like, yeah, it's like, yeah, that'd be cool. So we're not going to, like, yeah, I know I was planning on pivoting and we have like, a 3-book or 4-arc or 5-book story arc where like we're centering on Polly, but the story seems to have dragged us in this direction. So we're going to go here a little while. So next book, again, now we're picking up back where we left off with book 10, / book 11, and all those stories are kind of coming together, and, we'll have more. And, it was fun. It was fun. Again, a lot of this is, quite frankly, a lot of times, the stories I'm making are to please myself. If I'm happy, everybody's happy. That's what I want to do. I am my first audience.
It is interesting because, I mean, the fact that, like, in theory, this kind of grew out of wanting to explore this other idea, because there is a lot of heavy lifting that you do have to kind of get through here. Like, you got to bring Gina back into the fold. Like, that's not a small thing, so you do spend time on that. And then you also kind of build up that there's something else going on. Really like what you've done with the character of Gwen, who seems so sage and mysterious, but doesn't say a lot of words. And so, but when the words are said, that they're definitely impactful. And that was probably some of my favorite moments, from the idea that there's more going on than we realize, and Gwen knows more than other people do. And I thought that was a really interesting idea. I didn't expect that when we met Gwen, that this would end up being, again, that she would end up kind of dropping these tiny little truth bombs, with very little words, but definitely I open up the concepts and the ideas behind these characters.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. To me, it almost felt like cheating as I was doing it, to have this, like, this all-knowing character kind of pop up. But, I forgave myself in the sense that, like, okay, we're not done here, and we're setting things up. This is off the last. We'll see if Gwen, and what we're doing here is fun, important stuff. And sometimes, you need those characters, and not just in the storytelling. You need someone who, I want to put it another way, that, a lot of these, the stories sometimes the kids are kind of on their own in so many ways. And, sometimes having somebody step in who's just a little more knowing than them and give them a little more direction. And in this case, for me, it made sense. Again, not to give too much away, but to be very clear about it. She is a creature from space, and HILO is from another world. And, she knows things. Like, I was sort of thinking, like, this is her neighborhood. She lives out here in space. She's just, for him, he has no idea what's going on. It's like, oh no, I know what's going on with you. I live out here. This is my neighborhood. I'm from space. And I sort of felt like lots of people could have told HILO a little bit of this extra business that I'm telling him here. It's just, he doesn't live out here. He's down on Earth now. That's his jam. And I don't know, I kind of like, as you pointed out, I kind of like all-knowing characters. I like she is sort of, wise and mysterious. And she's a big lizard who's like shaped like a mango. So, who, at first we just think she's just like, an animal. Then she could talk, and then she could talk English, and then she like seems to have a lot to say. And then we learn, like more than that. It's very sci-fi. I mean, that's kind of what I wanted for this one. It's, we really wear a bunch of different, like, genre hats in HILO. It, starts off as kind of a science fiction-y friendship story, and then we get heavily into science fiction with multiple robots and this, and, and then we get into Gina, which is like, now we're getting a little more fantasy-oriented. And that sort of quick dividing line between fantasy and science fiction, and one can debate about that. And then this one's like, we're in space. I'm going to do all space things. I am.
A question about the narrative structure in the new book is that obviously you have to kind of jump in and have that kind of recreating that moment of the last volume, and you have Polly talking to DJ and crew about, how they got there, and that's kind of the framing sequence. How did you kind of settle on the recurring elements of having it kind of break back to them talking about it and then breaking back to the story throughout the volume, as opposed to just kind of bookending it with them telling the story?
Yeah, no, I guess for clarity, yeah, like, that's exactly what we do. We meet up with kids. Gina, HILO, and DJ are there with Pip and Polly and Mariah, and they're going to tell them what they've been up to. Part of me felt like I had to sort of acknowledge the fact that we're doing a flashback. And the other piece of it, what was helpful is that this, even though it's an all ages book, what's funny, okay, I'll say this first, I'll say that second. Even though it's an all ages book, I do feel the need that sometimes kids need a little help with storytelling. Way back when I started doing HILO, my editor had pointed out, like, you're being way too subtle. There was things I was doing, like, you're being way too subtle, you need to say that. And I was like, yeah, that's bad storytelling. She goes, no. Figure out a way that doesn't feel like bad storytelling, but, she said, you will have 7-year-olds who are reading this book, and that needs to be clear. It's like, well, I don't want the character just to say what they're feeling. I'm like, no. Have the character say what they're feeling. It's like, really? It's like, yeah, just do it in a way that doesn't make you feel sick. Just do it in a way that makes you feel like you're still telling a good story. And that was like, I was getting a tutorial. Like, that is your job. That is the lesson I'm leaving with you here. That's the job, is like, you want to tell a good story. It doesn't feel like you're just like spoon feeding them the information. And, in a way that feels sort of like, that has a light and elegance to it in telling the story. So, but at the same time, like, a 7-year-old doesn't kind of grok what's going on here. You got to give them a little more. It's like, oh, okay, yeah. And the truth is, I found that, depends on the story you're looking at. You look at any sort of procedural on television. I'm not going to name any procedural, but any procedural on television, people are spoon-fed what they need over 45 minutes. People say things aloud that they would never say in a million years. In general, we do that with all storytelling on television and motion pictures. That's the thing that people often don't acknowledge or they criticize now and again. None of this is realistic, even like a little bit. It's really like, people don't act this way. Because you know what? It's boring. Watching people actually live their lives is boring. So you're trying to do it in a unique way. Some get closer to reality than others. So you look at any procedural for an adult, they really spoon feed them. Your better shows, which are, usually your more gritty shows, your The Wire, Breaking Bad, they will do things like, what's going on? Like, what does that mean? It's like, you're not going to find out for 20 minutes. You might not find out for episodes from now what's going on there. You got to pay attention. It's like you're reading a book. They take their time. Like, I can't do that. I have to feel like the procedural. And I guess what I'm saying is that even the grown-up stuff, sometimes they spoon feed it like that. And the longest way to answer your question here is that what was helpful in these little cutting out of the flashbacks of the adventure was the characters get to, point out, like, oh man, those are the monsters we were fighting too. It's like, yes. Like, ideally I wouldn't have to say that, but it's helpful for the kids, to note that, like, yes, the story that you saw in the last book is also taking place in this book. We saw monsters in book 10, which are now showing up in book 11. And then Pip and Polly are having some fun with it. But also, I didn't mind it because it felt kind of organic, and we got to tell a few jokes in there and have a couple of running gags as they're, sitting around a proverbial campfire telling the story. So it was a good bridging device to get us from one scene to the next, but also underline that, like, we've done this. That was from the last book. Right. We're moving along now. And, again, it was helpful in that way.
Do you find it, at this point in the game, I would imagine, like, obviously you're used to being less subtle than you may want to be as a writer, or sometimes feel that you can be. So do you find that you enjoy kind of at times being able to kind of put lampshades on things and being able to not have to be overly clever or cute because you can be more kind of direct because that's what the audience at times would need? Or do you find that it's harder still to kind of retrain your brain from wanting to be more subtle to being more obvious?
Yeah, it varies. It really, it varies from whatever the moment is. Like, there's sometimes where it's like, well, one thing I can get away with when doing children's books and also doing like a graphic novel this length and this tone and whatnot, is that no one says, well, that's awfully convenient. There's never two things that kind of link up. It's like, oh, that's pretty convenient that those things just kind of came together the way it did. it's like, it's okay because you're doing a kid's book and the convenience can sort of work. I would say if we were to translate some of these stories to, a larger format, like a feature film, I would probably, I would rejigger things a lot and have to, amp things up in a way like, no, we need things to happen a little more organically. We need to set it up and pay it off a little bit better. This can't just happen. We got to lay the track a lot more. A lot of times I can do a couple of, Deus Ex Machina stuff, which is like, because it's goofy. It's funny. Like, when things like kind of pop up out of nowhere, even if they're like, not necessarily even like, good for the plot, but we got to move things along. So we're going to have a giant fish show up and swallow them. Like, how did that happen? That kind of came out of nowhere. Like, it absolutely came out of nowhere. A giant fish who come around and swallow them up might. So, yeah. But now and again, or rather often, there's things, these things have to link up in a way that sort of make a little bit of sense. If someone's got to do a thing, it's, you got to have a little bit of, because or but, we did this, and which led to that. The things can't just happen. I try to do a lot of cause and effect that if the characters do something that leads to something else, that's what you want to do because that feels the most honest and it makes for a more interesting story opposed to things just happening to them. They're going through things and, we tried this thing and oh my God, we screwed this up and now this is happening. And the thing that's happening is a bad thing, but actually provided a solution that we didn't even know was going to happen. But luckily we did that stupid thing and it worked out this way. That's what I am trying to do. Them make mistakes or them try to do a thing that didn't exactly work or worked mostly, or then something happens to another person which takes them down to another one. That's what makes it exciting and interesting. But tantamount to almost all of it is that it's about the characters. That's what becomes challenging, 11 books in, is that I'm still dealing with 11 and 12-year-olds who are, the characters, who can only grow and evolve and change so much, because they're, there's a status quo that has to happen in the story. They're not growing any older. They're not going to change. They're not going to move on to different things or have things happen to them. They do change. There's change happening, but those, what happens? Like, well, Gina gets to do magic. Gina gets to do more magic. Spoiler, HILO goes from being a robot to being a human being. Then he gets the superpowers back. These are the things, but, we can't move it around too much. And that's hard because when you do stories, you expect the characters to evolve and grow. And they can do that, but at some point, that is the difficulty I'm running into now. That we're only going to evolve and grow, and at some point, at the end of this story arc, I might end that. like we are okay, and now we are at a fixed point. And now I'm going to tell stories in this fixed point. We're going to have goofy adventures, but everyone is right where they need to be. This one has this powers, this one has that powers. This is the relationship between all of them. And, and this entire book's going to be about a giant squid who comes to Earth for whatever reason. And, it's going to be fun and interesting and still like a good book.
One thing that you mentioned before about, kind of leaning into the sci-fi more in this particular volume, and you have not been shy about some of your influences in the past. I'm curious how much fun you had making the Star Wars joke about the parsecs on the Kessel Run, because you definitely do that with Booter here.
Yes.
But you're doing it for a younger audience who's likely not aware of the original. And not aware of hopefully they're aware of Star Wars, but they may not be. They may not make that direct connection. So was there any discussion with your editor about including a gag like this, which is one we've heard a lot of over the years about Star Wars?
Okay. One, I'm throwing my editor, Shana Corey, under the bus. She has never seen Star Wars. Under the bus she goes. Under the bus she goes. Which, when she told me, which was shockingly not too long ago. Well, I said, well, this explains a bit here and there. Like, I sort of mentioned, I have a riff that HILO, it kind of has he's like sort of force sensitive. He gets feelings. He and Izzy get like a sensation. Like, and I told her, like, it's somewhere between, like, his spider sense and, like, a disturbance in the force. You can sort of feel a thing. And, it's not a cheat because when he's feeling things, it's usually something that kind of tracks. It's something about, like, another robot or, some sort of technology. There's things that he can sort of, like, he's hive minding a little bit about or hive emotioning about. It's there. Anyway, when I mentioned these things, she kind of yes me and, she didn't quite get it. Which later, when these things happen, like, what's this parsec business? It's like, oh, some Star Wars. I gotta explain it to you. Okay. So with those are flat out, straight up Easter eggs that I know an adult who's a Star Wars fan is going to get it immediately. But they had to be a little bit of a capital F fan because you're running the mill. I saw Star Wars, not going to know that, Han Solo said they made the Kessel Run, and I'm now forgetting the number. Is it 12 parsecs? 13 parsecs? He corrects someone.
I think so.
Yeah. In Force Awakens, it said 11 parsecs. Is it 12? Whatever it was, or 10. It's later talking about the parsecs is actually, it's to measure weight and not time. And we bring that up in HILO. So anyway, that's for me. That's for fun. And of course, I know it's part of, like, nerd popular culture, and people are going to get it. I had Reggie, Gina's great grandmother. When she first greets her, she refers to her like, she looks at her as Mama Reggie. When she first sees her, it's like, Reggie, that is a name I have not heard in a long time. And I got a note from my editor saying, like, she said, that's kind of an awkward phrase. I go, yeah, it's Star Wars. I'm doing Obi-Wan Kenobi. It's like, it's a reference. It's like, oh, okay. I think that's where the Star Wars actually conversation happened, like around book 8. She admitted she'd never seen Star Wars. Which actually worried me. It's like, man, I could have been ripping stuff off wholesale and you're just letting it go. I didn't know. So that's a perfectly fine and decent Easter egg, which is, like, clearly an homage. Clearly I'm having a little bit of fun. It's far different. I mean, when my son was younger, he said, I think you should take the Star Wars reference out there. You'll be accused of stealing. Like, no, buddy, it's referential. It's, it's an homage. Clearly. I'm not trying to hide it. I'm not stealing an idea. I'm lifting dialogue because it's fun. I think also in, like, the Gina arc, someone refers to a bar they have to go through as, a collection of scum and villainy. We do these. I'm not picking the small lines either. I'm picking, like, big quotable stuff.
You're playing the hits.
Yeah, I'm playing the hits. Thank you. Yes, exactly.
I think I've asked this before, but it's always something that does stand out to me. Is that when you're writing the book, and then this sounds like such a silly process question, but you have obviously your chapter breaks, and then you always have a name of each chapter. I'm always curious. Sometimes they're gags. Like, there's a great one here where it's like, we're going to find Gina, and the next chapter is like, they didn't. And so I like the gags, but sometimes it's more descriptive. I'm curious how much thought kind of goes into those, and at what stage of the process are you kind of developing those? Is it when it's a gag? I would imagine it kind of comes out naturally as you're writing, but some of them are more descriptive of what happens in the chapter, and it feels like maybe you're right, put that one in afterwards. I'm curious what your process is for those chapter titles.
You've remarkably actually answered your own question. You've hit upon exactly what I do. So, cutting to the end, I write the chapter titles last. It's like literally last. Because it's like, what was this chapter about, and what do I want to convey? But the ones that are gags usually come to me almost instantly. Like, within the writing. Like, like we're gonna go find Gina. Chapter 3. They do not find Gina. Like, that joke I know, and I write it in right away. Like, yeah, that's a good one. And so the jokes usually come right away. The ones which are not gags, which if I could, I would have 12 chapters in every one of them. I would if I could, but a lot of times I just can't. I just can't drum it up. Like where's the joke in there? And chapter title jokes are kind of hard to come by. So yeah, if they're funny, they occur to me right away. If not, they come at the end, and I just kind of want to figure out something that it feels a little bit clever, something that does a little thing that no lie, it's 11 books, and sometimes, I got a couple of turkeys in there which don't do much of anything. You know, it's like, all right, I gotta just think of something like, oh, that's okay. You know, I'll go back and forth like, okay, they can't all be, you know, deeply clever. That's mildly clever, you know. And some, you know, are just, you know, some are a little thoughtful. Some actually get to be a little dramatic. I like those too. They get to be a little bit dramatic. And anyone playing at home, anytime that we've, you know, got the chapter title, which is actually the same as the book, like, it's like, that is a red flag, like, okay, something very important's about to happen. You know, if we're on chapter 11, book, like, you know, and then everything goes wrong, and then chapter 11 is called, and then everything goes wrong. It's like, this is it. This is our penultimate moment. This is it. So yeah, a fair amount of thought goes into the chapter titles. The funniest stuff, I'd say not much thought, but they're the best ones, and the ones that occur to me right away.
A question about Gwen before I kind of let you go. Is
Sure,
Gwen?
sure.
She's a green creature from space. Is she Hilo's Yoda?
Yeah, she probably will be. She started out actually. That's the funny thing about, like, speaking of chapter titles and book titles, I named the book. Books don't get titled until I'm done with them too. Because I don't know what it's going to be. And originally Gwen was an ape, and I thought an ape was actually too evocative of, I don't know, apes are kind of like people. They're like close to people, and like it was too much. And, you know, Gwen being like a lizard, like lizards are pretty far from human. You know, and like, which like brought me back to like Yoda. It's like, well, Yoda's like a little lizard dude, isn't he? Kind of. But yeah, her like entire, you know, her entire race are kind of special. So, yeah, we're not done with her. We will most likely see her again. Now I have to figure out, like, when do we run into Gwen again? How is she helpful? What will she do? She's a little Yoda-like. She's not, I'll tell you now, she's not going to train him to do anything, but she is someone, you know, closer to, you know, and not, I hope I don't offend anyone, but, closer to like a wise sage, closer to someone who's like a shaman, closer to, in reality, someone who's more like a Buddhist monk, someone who, you know, Jedi are like Buddhist monks, and that's where they originally were kind of ripped off from anyway. So it's similar in that sense. But this is a character who is a peaceful character. This is someone who, I would say if you were like to try to figure Gwen out, she doesn't exist to do much except to, like, you know, listen and learn and grow. You know, that's her vibe. You know, she's not going home. She's not a job. She's not a barista. She's not like, you know, she's not a queen of a planet or anything like that. You know, she'll go back to, like, you know, they're basically very chill creatures, which what they do is like observe and they think and they feed and grow, and like, you know, that's what they are. So that would probably be helpful later.
The last question I'll ask you, and I think generally speaking, I always ask this at some point. For this book's dedication, what was your inspiration behind using this for your particular dedication in this volume compared to the others?
Off the top of my head, I can't remember who I dedicated it to because I've written 2 books since then and had 2 more dedications. Who was the most recent book dedicated to? I'm going to go look it up. This was dedicated to. It's my kids. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
It just popped in my head. Yeah, well, it's been, this is book 11, but it's been 10 years. This is the 10th anniversary of HILO. The first 2 books came out in the first year. So much of this actually started because of my children. In the least Pollyanna way, like I started doing HILO in large part because, my son wanted to read my Batman comics, and, you know, he was too young to read that, and I gave him Jeff Smith's Bone, and he loved it. And I really thought about, like, you know, I should do something like this. And then not too long after that, my daughter was so invested in the books that she was like making suggestions and whatnot. So it was very, very much about my kids. So my children were, you know, my daughter's like 5, you know, like 5 or 6 when the series started. My son was 8 or 9 when the series started. So, you know, my oldest is now 19 and my youngest is now 16. And, you know, that's, you know, it's a span of a huge chunk of life. So with, outside of the 10 years that I spent doing this series, the more significant part of my life is that my kids went from being kids to being young adults. I'm still telling this kid story, and they're no longer kids, and they're still a part of it. But so that's what marked the moment. These 10 years for me is, my life with them. So it had less to do with the story and more to do with where we are, and this is the 10th anniversary. A decade, which feels like it is one of those things like, man, it just kind of went by real quick. Like, not really. No. I mean, it seems crazy to me that we're, coming up on the 11th book, and I've already put the 12th one to bed, and we're doing more. And I do everything I can with my whole head and heart and soul not to take for granted that I get to do this. It's a thing that comes with, my series is successful. We do well. Is it like Gonzo? Is it crazy? Is it like, no, it's not. It's nowhere near like something like, Dave Filkey and Dogman and Captain Underpants. It's nowhere near like Jeff Kinney and Wimpy. Two gentlemen who I know and admire and I think are phenomenal, and two of the most successful authors in history. But we do very well. Very well in the sense that I don't have to worry about doing more. Random House is happy to do as many as I possibly can churn out. So again, I try not to take it for granted that I get to keep doing this and how long I've been doing it. And again, all I have to do is like look at my kids who were so small when I started, and they were like the age group that I was writing to, when I started. And now they still read them, but they read them differently because they're young adults. Got a 19-year-old and a 16-year-old, so they read it differently. I mean, they're our kids, that lived in this household. So there's no one who's more adept at, knowing their way around cartoons than these two kids. Things that things that I assume that other people are like, isn't part of their zeitgeist is part of theirs. Anything from animated movies to cartoons and comic books and whatnot. And, like your parents don't have like 1,000 books in their house? Really? That's weird. You can't turn around and like,
actually,
yes, sir. You do?
Well, I was just going to say, 1,000 books? No. I mean, obviously comics, yes, but I don't know, sure. Maybe a fair number. I do wonder, I think of that as well, because like my son's read so many comics, and like he really gravitates, he really enjoys a lot of the 60s stuff, and he just really enjoys it. And I'm like, yeah, I don't think this is a common thing you're going to be able to share with a lot of your friends, unfortunately. They're not going to have access to the stuff, or they're not going to be caring necessarily about it. A question I wanted to ask you, kind of where you talked about, and we've talked about obviously before, about the idea that HILO was this reaction to wanting to have something that your kids could read as well, and that'd be more appropriate for them. Did your kids eventually read your Batman work?
Oh yeah, for sure. that was, it wasn't, goodness, when my son, I think he was like, 12, and it's like, yeah, you can read this now. You're okay. And, my daughter got in there around the same age, if not a little bit earlier. Second kids always get in there a little earlier on stuff. No, they had the opportunity to read like lots of stuff. And they were reading Pedro Maid, long ago, which gave them a, great understanding of, the lives that me and Pam, me and their mother had lived. They had not actually seen, those playing at home 31 years ago. My wife, Pam, and I were on a reality TV show called The Real World, which is where we met. And no, our children have not watched that yet. And they've not watched that purely because it's going to be very uncomfortable because their mother and father were dating other people on television. And, and that's weird. They'll eventually get there, and, that'll be somewhat uncomfortable, but, know that are at the age that they've read everything I've done, even, the book I did, The Adventures of Barry Ween, which is, 10-year-old boy genius who curses every third word, like big F-bombs too. Like, real filthy stuff. Nothing sexual, I should say that. That's what was always important to me, that, when talking about this stuff, is like, nothing like, nothing profane, but like lots of foul language. So my children have read pretty much the whole catalog. I think, give or take a couple of, story arcs of Green Arrow here and there, which we'll probably get around to eventually. So that's fun. Again, also something else I take for granted. I know other authors and storytellers who they write prose, and sometimes to get their children to dig into their prose is hard. I don't have any of that, which is sometimes it will be like, hey, do you want to check this out? Like, yeah, I think it's a comic book. Like, I'll leave it here. If you eventually get around to it, go ahead. I'm just mentioning that I know you, and I think you'll like this one. And so they do. So it's always been, it's been my entire career has been a very odd sort of family project always. They're always, it's not just dad's work. It's just something that's always there and that I do. And when I finish it, like, here, check this out. I'm done. They get to read it first, and, they have thoughts. I ask them, I probe them, like, is there anything in here that doesn't make sense? Anything in here that, you didn't like? Like, okay, then give me the good stuff. What do you like? It's fun. I mean, everyone should get to do that.
Was there anything, like, when they were kind of reading through your catalog, was there anything in particular that almost made you realize how proud you were of it when your kids were able to read it? I'm not, and I'll just keep it on your comic book work in particular, but was there just something that you maybe didn't even realize how much you cared about it until your kids read it?
Well, it's a cheap answer, but kind of all of it. It's really when, these are my kids, and in deference to all other children in the whole world who might like anything I do, or adults who might like anything that I do, it's far more compelling and means a lot when they like turn around. When they were old enough to read Pedro Mech, and they did, and they got it. And it was a very important experience for us, for them to not just read it, but kind of read it over and over again. Like, they read it like a lot. They read it and they read it again, and it was in the room. I'd see them poking around at it again, and which had me, wondering what that was. And I think it was like, because they are reading about their parents' lives, and a friend of ours. That was really cool. And and boy, okay, there's one that was just sitting there I forgot about. I did a comic strip for a number of years, for about 4 years. I ran newspapers before I gave it up in favor of doing graphic novels. And so many years back, my daughter pulled the 2 volumes of Frumpy the Clown, which is the comic strip I did. She pulled it off the shelf, and she loved it so much, and was quoting it to me, like walking it up and telling me, like, I like this part, like this is so funny. Like, it was her favorite thing. Like, she loved Frumpy the Clown, which is no longer in print. And I just had these 2 volumes, and she loved it so much, which, like, it was the one thing that made me want to go back and do more. That she loved it so much. It's like, man, it makes me want to, like, do more Frumpy the Clown. But I knew, I was like, no, I gotta move on to this. But everything she liked about HILO as a kid, the goofiness and the ongoing story and whatnot, she also liked it in Frumpy, because it's like, it's sort of the same sense of humor, except with this, the comic strip, so they're all jokes. And, I didn't realize, it was in this moment that I realized that she, and later my son, who was late because coming to this, it was when she got into it that he got into it, that, they share the same sense of humor. We all do. I like to think this is funny and somewhat universal, and I guess it is, but there's jokes in there that pop up, like, that they just like the family cat was named Frodo. And, they asked, like, was that because of Lord of the Rings? Like, yeah, that's long before the movies came out. That was like, Frodo was, I was naming that from the books. And that was a joke for Mom, and anyone else who got, they're like, oh, Frodo, right, the cat's named Frodo. And, the grandmother in the series is we call her Nana, because that's what, my children call my mother. Things like this. And also they were sort of noting, like grandma, I mean, Nana doesn't look like Nana, but she kind of acts like Nana. Like, yes, but don't tell my mom. You know, my mother looks at that and thinks I'm doing her own mother. She thinks I'm doing my grandma, my dad. So I said, and she's not wrong. A little from column A, a little from column B. That's a little bit my grandmother, a little bit your grandmother. But that was a wild moment. That was the one that kind of stuck out to me. Which also, you know, quite frankly, told me that I was like, yeah, I'm doing the work I'm supposed to be doing. Like, I like, I mean, I'll eventually probably get around to circle back to doing stories for adults at some point, in some way, in some fashion. I know I'll have an itch somewhere that I want to do that. But I really like doing all ages. I mean, it's really, as I say, like, I'll do an adult story. If I can figure out how to make a story, the same story, that's for everybody, I'll probably do that. You know, I don't know if I need to, like, you know, have some foul language in there or like violence or what have you. I don't know. There's something fun about occupying the space. Because I guess it was the space I always wanted to occupy when I first started, when I was a kid. You know, I wanted to do comic strips, which are all ages. And I'm still kind of doing that. I'm still doing stuff that I believe that grown-ups and kiddos can enjoy somewhat equally.
I guess your kids brought you back to where you belong.
Yeah, it really did. It really was. I mean, that's I often talk about. I mean, here we are 10 years in, and you know, I came back to the exact kind of storytelling that I always thought I should do. I mean, I drifted, you know, pretty far away from it. You know, I started out doing comic strips, and that wasn't quite working. And I started. Well, no, it was working. It's just when I did Pedro May. And I said, you know, I think I want to do bigger stories than this. And, you know, then that got me over into superhero comics, which, you know, we did all the dark and gritty ones, which were not for kids. And, you know, and even, you know, like I'm doing animation, which I love. But that's working with, you know, dozens, if not hundreds of people. But doing HILO got me exactly back to the picture I had for myself when I was 8 years old. That I'd be sitting at a drawing table, making things up by myself and drawing them. And that's it, you know, and they're mostly going to be funny and they're going to, you know, be kind of goofy drawings like Peanuts, you know, they'll look like Sparky Schultz stuff. And it, you know, except now it's this ongoing adventure. And again, I try to be grateful. I try to remember that, you know, I get to keep making them. It's not that someone said like, yeah, book 8 didn't do what we want. And we think we're going to just call it, you know. I know authors who have to go through that. Like, it's like, you know, they're planning on doing like a 3-book series and book 1 didn't do so good. And like, and that's that. And like, you know, they tell me these stories. They're like, oh, geez, Louise, really? You know, again, like, be grateful, dude. You're, you know, the biggest, if you have a complaint from your publishers, they wish you could possibly do more. And now you're doing 2 books in 1 year and they're so happy. And they're asking like, yeah, can you pull that off like next year? It's like, well, I can't do 2 books a year every year. Well, but again, yeah.
Well, again,
I'm doing more, you know, more and more, and that's more books for kids, and you know, now creating hopefully a whole little universe of heroes that kids can follow and enjoy. It'll be fun.
Well, again, like I've said before, like I continue to enjoy these books every year, and my son has enjoyed them as well. And you know, when it arrived in the mail, he was very excited to read the new volume, and he was going back as well and reading number 10 and kind of seeing where they connect. So it continues to be something that we enjoy as a family. And my daughter's 6, so she's not really reading on her own yet. So when she does, you better believe there's going to be a whole stack of HILO books ready for her.
That's fantastic. Oh, that's fantastic. I do enjoy the generational part of it too. I mean, I was talking to a young man who was about 15 and has been reading it since he was like 9 or something, and talking about the sister who was like 6 or 7, and so like, yeah, she just gets to plow through all of them. I had to start waiting like a year at a time. Like yep. Like, yeah, so it's like, you know, we're about to do a box set, which is like all like the first 10 books. Which is mind blowing to me. Like they're going to put out this, you know, 35-pound book, not book, but box set, like all 10 books in one, you know, with a snazzy wraparound cardboard case. And it's like, man, some kids are just going to be able to like, boom, here you go, all 10 of them. That's a decade of work. Read them slow, okay? Take your time.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right, well, Judd, thank you so much for coming back. It's always a pleasure. I'm excited to talk to you again next year. I would have you on more often. I mean, one thing I don't think we've ever done a deep dive into when you've been on the past has been your Green Arrow run. So if you're ever, if you're up for it in the summer or sometime and, have an hour or so, I would love to pick your brain about Green Arrow.
Oh, I'd love that too. And holy crap, sir, this just popped in my head. And I apologize. I meant to drop you a note. I listened to you and your wife talk about Pedro and me.
Oh, you did?
When you all did. I did. And I'm so sorry I didn't drop you a note. I'm so sorry I didn't drop you a note. I can't believe I didn't. I'm just remembering this now. It's all fully coming back to me. I apologize. I think after our last conversation, you had made mention of this, and I do listen to the podcast, and it's like, oh my goodness, they talked about Pedro and me. I had missed it. So it was, I can't tell you what a delight and, oh no, made me choke up. You guys are really, it was a delightful conversation. And dang it, you had a couple of extraneous, questions that weren't answered. I couldn't even remember what it was, anything from, I think it was silly things Pam was still in medical school at the time. There was 5 little things that you were kind of asking aloud to the universe that I was answering. I was going to circle back with you and say, okay, for one, I was deeply moved. You guys had a really wonderful and heartfelt conversation about it. It was really a wonderful fly on the wall experience to hear you talk about it. It was really, clearly, because it's the two of you, and you say your rapport is beyond, it's just stupid. But it's, you're finishing each other's sentences and you know each other's emotions. And you're talking about it. And it was just really, it was nice. I hear, humble brag. People talk to me about, Pedro and me quite often, but it was a very unique experience to hear you all talk about it in this way. You were familiar with it. She wasn't. And I'm trying to remember if you guys had seen the show or not. I can't remember. I don't
think so, because we would have been a little young, and I don't think we had access to it as easily.
You were in Canada. So it was, and you guys didn't have MTV. You had VM. Is that what it was called? I think.
Much music at the time.
Much music. That's right. One time, my wife and I, Pam and I, met Bare Naked Ladies, and we realized just in the moment that there's the one time I pulled a string. I name dropped. This is 4 years after the show. I name dropped so we just get backstage and meet them. And it's occurring to me as we're walking up, Jesus Christ, they don't know who we are. They never, they don't watch they don't watch MTV. Why would they still live in Canada. So we're going to have to this is going to be awkward. So we talked to Ed for 10 minutes, and he couldn't have been nicer. And then we're okay, we're going to go. Anyway, so yeah, you guys did not grow up watching MTV. You can watch it, I believe, still on Paramount Plus if you haven't gotten around to it. And YouTube on the sly is still allowed to, they still post the tribute to Pedro Zamora. It's this, I almost don't want to talk about it too much, but my understanding, and hopefully it won't ever change hands, it's not my understanding, I know nothing about this. I do note that the tribute to Pedro Zamora, which was an hour-long special I did after Pedro passed away, wound up in YouTube and has stayed there. And no one has pulled it down. And I can only think that because it's not available anyplace else, that despite the very litigious corporation that has the rights to it, they're just going to leave it up there. And I always thought that was kind of nice. And hopefully they will just kind of leave it up there. It's really good, and it's a wonderful encapsulation this time on the show, and a little bit more before the show and a little bit after when we lost him. So that's still out there. So sorry, big old sidebar there, and I apologize. I was going to reach out to you because it was wonderful, sir, and thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I'm glad you listened. I'm glad we didn't embarrass ourselves talking about it. It was interesting.
To the contrary. Yeah. Quite the opposite.
Going back, that we needed a book of the month, and she was like, well, I'll step in. I'm like, all right, let me find something that you would enjoy. And I was like, well, I think this is really good. I remember the first time I read it, and I remember where it was. I think it was in public transit or something, and I was just so engrossed, and I completely missed my bus stop, and I just had to figure out how to get back, because I was just so moved by your words and your pictures, and it was just so tremendous. And so it was really interesting to be able to share it with her. And I don't think she expected or realized just how emotional it would be. And again, so anyways, people want to go back and check that out. That's I believe, episode 1025 from January 2024, where we talked about that. But I'm glad you were able to listen, and I do enjoy the discussion. I guess that would be a really weird experience hearing someone talk about something you've done very in depth, but also something that was so important to you in terms of your life. It's not just any story; it's a very important story.
Yeah, it's well, we kind of get used to it. It's one of these things. I put it out there, and there's again, we're coming up on like 25 years since the book came out too. What was unique about this, and again, I've had people talk about the book, I've had people interview me about the book, I've had people reflect upon it. This was, it was just very, very unique because you had read it, and now your wife had read it, and you were having a conversation about it. And it wasn't sort of a dissertation on it. It wasn't sort of like we're trying to, it was a very, honest talk about it. It was, well, I'll put it this way. It's been 31 years since the show. It's been 25 years since the book came out. And it was a conversation that actually moved me and surprised me, which I wasn't aware that could happen anymore. So there. So I appreciate it.
I will let my wife know.
Please do. Please do. You guys were aces. It was wonderful.
Well, again, thank you so much.
Sorry, I didn't reach out a year ago.
That's okay. You are more than forgiven. I will reach out this summer, and hopefully we can have you back to talk about Green Arrow, and obviously we'll have you come back to talk about your next book next February, I guess, when it's probably going to come out. But thanks again for your time, and we will talk soon.
Perfect. Thank you, sir. You be well.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.